Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Matt Elliott. I go by Scenario on the message boards, and I'm a senior world designer here on Lord of the Rings Online. Welcome to another one of our casual strolls through Middle Earth. Today, as voted by the players a couple of months ago now, I'm just kind of going down through the list. We're going to take a look at Western Rohan. For those of you that are unfamiliar with this stream, this is a world design focused stream. I'm going to take you through the landscape of Middle Earth as we've created it, region by region, talking about all of the work that goes into building the landscape and the effort that goes into adapting a piece of literature like Lord of the Rings into a video game setting. Where we have to compromise, where we, try to hew as closely to the lore as possible. What this, for those of you who have not been here before, what this stream is not an opportunity to discuss things like server lag, game systems, the new class that's coming out, our recently released avatar updates. Those questions are best suited for people other than myself. I will not be answering any of those questions. Your best luck is to wait around for a stream where someone from one of the other teams within SSG who work on Lord of the Rings would be able to answer them for you, or to try your hand at asking those questions on the weekly Court of the Rings stream that happens Friday noon Eastern time with our community manager, Cordovan. With that in mind, let me make it not nighttime. All right. So welcome everyone to the boundary between East and West Rohan. One of the last streams I did, not the previous one, but the one before that, was a trip through Eastern Rohan, and now we're going to cross the rivers and head into Western Rohan. Western Rohan is distinct in that it's one of the areas that I haven't really had a lot of experience building. I helped out a little bit with it, but at the time that it was being built, I was off on other projects for Turbine. When they were building it. So I did not have much of a hand in this, so some of this is going to be exploratory for me as well. I've played through all of the content in this space, but I haven't actually had a hand in the development of it, with the exception of the housing neighborhoods that are here, which we'll probably skip those because we have gone through those before as part of another stream. Another thing to remind everyone is I do tend to talk a lot and forget to drink water. So if it's been a while since you've seen me have a drink, let me know and I'll have a drink of water. Also, apologies if I have to mute myself at any point to cough. It is all of a sudden springtime here in southern New England. We got a nice stretch of really, really nice weather last week, and now all of the plants here have decided that it is officially springtime, and my allergies are killing me. So without further ado, let us cross over into Western Rohan. So one of the fun things about, and one of the challenges of building Western Rohan prior to it actually being fully developed was, we had to the east this broad vista. The river was our impassable, and we had this broad vista of landscape that we needed to do a little bit of work on beforehand in order to actually make it something that didn't just look like a blank green field. So there was a little bit of pre-production that went into this to just kind of make sure that we had some of these border areas fleshed out just a little bit, as well as the overall general terrain fleshed out. So here we are in Entwade. As I believe the storyline for this area is the villagers of Entwade are preparing to head to Helm's Deep. They are evacuating, war is coming, that is the safe space. So I believe a lot of the stories in Western Rohan were associated with that, associated with, the common folk retreating to the safety of Helm's Deep and the Glittering Caves. Run through here. I'll see what if any questions there are while we're going through here. Doesn't look like there's any yet, so I'm just going to keep on running. I think one of the one of the things we kind of take for granted in a lot of our standard world building is the concept that there are going to be kind of mountains surrounding the areas that we're building, so that we have like good natural boundaries, and we have a way to more easily like vary up the terrain if we wanted to. And I think one of the challenges that we hit with both Eastern and Western Rohan, to some degree, oops, was how do we make this kind of expanse into something that, all right, come on server, wake up. How do we make this expanse into something that can can feel distinct and interesting as you progress through the different areas? And it may not let me go where I want to go quite yet. Apologies for the server. We're just kind of waking the server up, so it might take a little bit to like kick the tires and get things going. And kind of grudgingly has let me in this far. So Fusselheim says, I have an odd question perhaps. I wonder why named NPCs change their appearances all of a sudden. So I pick up a quest from a named quest giver in a small camp somewhere in the wilds, let's say Great River. When I come back a few minutes later, he's totally different, like he has grown a beard or lost all of his hair or something. The name is still the same though. So that is part of our, we have a system in place that allows us to kind of randomize the appearance of NPCs, when they load into client. And, all right, reduced awareness. We can do this, server. So when you are kind of entering into the space for the first time, you load it up, it randomly selects the appearances. And this is really helpful for us to just kind of create a diversity throughout a space. And I think it varies depending on the designer who's working on something. For us, when we're doing things like vendors, stable masters, and whatnot, especially since we've moved away from having all of those characters have specific distinct names, having them kind of just randomize what they look like whenever you load in the screen, whenever you load into a space, I think kind of just adds a little bit of interest and diversity into character appearances. I think some designers, when they're making named NPCs, very specifically want their characters to look a certain way and will set their characters to look a certain way. And others, don't do that as much. So it really varies and depends on the purpose of the NPC and what the individual designers want to do with those NPCs. And one of the things that I wish we could do, which I think would help, at least for landscape variety's sake, is a way for us to slightly vary the scale of enemies when they spawn onto landscape, so that you could have like a lineup of orcs, and all of those orcs, if they're an orc archer, for example, generally they'll probably look all the same. You'll have the same silhouette and whatnot going on them. And I'd kind of like to see a setup where we could have our enemies just spawn like, point, be like 5% bigger or 5% smaller when they generate, so that you get this, very distinct look from each of them as they spawn in. And I think that's something that kind of adds to variety in a space. It's something that I've been building monster camps. One of the things that I've been trying to do too is, not have some consistency in what appears in the camps, but not have everything in the camp always be the same, throughout all of it. So there might be a section of a camp that you go into where, one time it's an orc archer and another time it's an orc ravager, just to kind of keep things a little bit like more fresh and interesting and engaging, as you're going through a space. So for this stream now, there are certainly a ton of dungeon interiors that we'll get to later on. Probably won't get to all of them. I'll pick a few and we'll go into them. But there's just a lot of just open space in this region. and so I haven't really had much of a specific goal in mind outside of kind of just wandering through, through the regions, through the areas of the region, and talking a little bit as I go. I'm gonna get myself a drink. I love, I think I mentioned it before last time when we did Eastern Rohan. I love this forest here. Fangorn, I think, does a really, really great job of, excuse me, of feeling like a forest with a, lush canopy without feeling too tree dense, which I think is something that in, other regions that we've built, that tree density can be, that balance of canopy versus tree density can be a little tricky to hit. Because some of the trees, they're not quite authored in the way that you really want to see, the canopy authored in. But I think with what we've done in the old forest, like this works so well for this space. It feels like you can look up and you can see little like peaks of light poking through here and there. Um, and I think one of the biggest things too that I appreciate, and I think it's a big difference between what we built here and what we built with Aaron Lasgalen, is it's dark and it stays dark pretty well, but it's not at a level of oppression which uh, Aaron Lasgalen has. It's easy to get lost, but I guess it's easy to get lost, but not as easy to get stranded in, if that makes sense. All right, so another question. Kaifir asks, any thoughts about a post-war Rohan like King's Gondor? Would be really nice to see as the Fellowship marches back home. Um, so I can't really speak for when slash if we would go in that direction. I think it's something that as we progress in the narrative, and if it makes narrative sense for us to go in that direction, then I wouldn't be shocked if we do go in that direction. Um, but for the time being, we're engaged in and interested in and excited about going to these somewhat unexplored territories, places that we haven't been before from the game perspective, and places that are kind of in general like not really fleshed out all that much because the books didn't spend a lot of time there. They may have mentioned going to places like Umbar, but we really haven't seen too much of it. So it's an opportunity for us to be a bit more whole cloth creative than we were able to be kind of elsewhere. I think Gondor, Rohan, Rivendell, like these are all places that are very, very clearly laid out and discussed and defined. And I'm to pause briefly. Like I'm not going to go through a ton of the old forest because there's or the Fangorn forest because there's definitely a lot of it. So I think I'm going to head back now and hit the rest of the area. Um, So yeah, I think for us creatively, especially considering how long the game has been going, you can look at you look at the branding that we have here, on the stream where it's like 16th anniversary. We've been going for a while now, so the opportunity to go to a place that hasn't really been visited all that much before is really, really compelling for us, and something that we're very we're very focused on, very interested and excited to do. Not that telling stories in a post-war Rohan couldn't be interesting, but I think for us creatively, it's much more compelling to go in the routes that we're going now. So Furhar93, apologize if I butchered that. Says, I like that you're not constantly tripping over roots like you are in Tor Druidan. Yeah, and I think actually the other segment, the Eastern Rohan portion um, of Fangorn, also kind of had some of that root problem as well. Um, Aaron Bard says, wanted to say how much I love traveling through the landscape, just doing nothing, just doing just nothing with all the lighting effects and weather effect. I wish we had a little bit more flexibility in what we could do for weather effects. I think we have some somewhat compelling like rainstorms and whatnot, and I've been trying to kind of push atmosphere a little bit more when we do the weather types. But there are just certain types of weather that could even be a bit more localized. Like it would be great, and this is something more for when thinking about like modern rendering and whatnot. But it would be great to be able to just kind of like look off into the distance here and actually see what looks like a volumetric rainstorm happening over in the distance and being able to run there to do that, to run into the rainstorm basically. But we really haven't. We can't really do something like that all that easily within our current tools. But yeah, it's something to dream about for the future. Definitely. Let me jump over this fence. One of the things I remember playing through all of these hubs and whatnot is just kind of how well tension is like constructed within them. How you feel like there are forces that are occupying, such as these Dunlendings, and you can really feel the tension between the quest givers in the space and the enemies that you're going up against. Aaron Bard also asks, when you say you are a world builder, what does that cover? Hills and trees, buildings, furniture in the buildings. So it covers a broad swath of things. I think classically we can also be considered things like level designers. We tend to, I tend to think of myself as a world designer because I don't just think in terms of the decoration and whatnot. We think about what overland gameplay is going to be like. We think about how we build an ecology in the mixed spawns of the world, of the landscapes we make. Like, it's important for me to feel like there's things that make sense and feel like there's a connectivity between a region as you progress through it. I think in the past we built things with a very theme park mentality, which I think is pretty much the same. Is pretty much true for all of our old regions, not just in terms of what it looks like, but the enemy makeups that are in it, where it's like you can be on one side of a region boundary and then step over and be a um, completely different set of like enemies and whatnot, and that always feels like it's just kind of out of nowhere. So as we think about now building out regions, it's thinking about how we can make it feel like there's an ecology, like there's a hunter prey system going on in there, types of enemies that are represented in those spaces. um, so that's that's a component to what it means to be a world designer. We also deal in lighting and how the lighting in the landscape and in dungeon spaces, interiors works and looks, and how navigatable a space is. We deal with the near detail decorations as well. Things like placing trees and shrubs and rocks and chairs and benches. All of that kind of falls under our purview. So we're more we're storytellers in the sense that you know we want to imply a narrative in the spaces we build, even if we aren't ourselves the ones who are writing the stories, who are writing the quests and whatnot. So we'll go through here and check a couple more questions. Aaron Bard also asks, can we make snow in the Shire? So I think one of the things, so this kind of dovetails into some of the things that we're experimenting more with how our landscapes work. And in terms of like, we kind of, as part of the Minas Morgul expansion pack, we started working with this idea of tales of yore or alternate versions of landscapes that are specific for storytelling. And, I think at some point there could be versions of regions that we've been to before that are snow covered, and they're snow covered because the narratives that we're telling in them are set at a very specific time, a very specific period in the story of Lord of the Rings. So as you go into those places, you might see that it's snowing because the time of year that the story is set in is it's snowing. These wouldn't be persistent world changes. So the normal Shire that you're used to being in the Shire, that's kind of like time locked at and around the time Frodo and Merry and Pippin are leaving the Shire. So that's not snowy times. That's not to say we couldn't make a version of the Shire that is snowy times if the narratives work for it. We've done that with, Azanulbazar, which is an in the past version of the Dimmeril Dale. We did Mordor Besieged, which is an in the past version of Mordor. We did, Elderslade at War, which was a, narrative forwarding version of Elderslade. So all of these, ideas happen because, we wanted to make sure that we could tell those kinds of stories, and by creating new versions of landscape, and this is what we're doing with Update 36 as well. We're doing the post-war version of Gondor, and you're kind of approaching it from east to west as opposed to west to east from the original narrative. So there's lots of opportunity for us to do that, but when we do that, I can't speak to the when. Squirrel asks, is area versus quest density a consideration? The area near the mine always felt missing some things to do. So that's something that we certainly discuss amongst ourselves as we are building and planning a region. We do want to make sure that at least as you visit hubs and towns, there are things for you to do in them that can spoke out to the stuff around there. But I also think that one of the things we want to explore, the world design team wants to explore a little bit more, is the idea of, kind of freeform territory. We did this a lot with Swanfleet and Cardolan, where, the content of those areas is somewhat focused in specific places. And then there's a lot of just broad, expansive space that there's really not much of anything to do in there from a quest perspective. And we've built things like that in the past where things were very content light, and in general there's been a fairly positive response to that. So I think going forward we're gonna see what we can do about having that balance between narrative forward, narrative heavy, content heavy spaces, and spaces that are a little bit lighter and have a little bit less in them to allow the players to kind of get out there and explore and live in the world a little bit more. Aaron Bard says, is it a huge complication working on older landscapes? So it depends on the kind of work that we're doing. If we are doing things like updating terrain textures here and there, that's not usually too complicated. We did a lot of that as part of kind of our initial pass, getting ready for the legendary server initiatives that we've released. Excuse me. You can see Edoras in the distance here. So yeah, so there are some aspects of working in older landscapes that are easier. Things like just doing terrain textures, super easy. We can work on those all day and not really feel like we're impacting the game world. When it gets tricky is when we start interacting with physical stuff. So say we wanted to go and put new trees in the scene files. There's the possibility that us adding new trees could cause our kind of more dynamic scene population systems to go, oh, well, this tree is now too big and can't be placed there, and it could change how things are arranged. And in changing how things are arranged, we might find that, oh, a designer hung a note on a tree, and now that tree isn't there anymore because things have changed, or the note is embedded in the tree. So we always want to make sure that we use a somewhat soft touch when doing those kinds of changes if we can help it, or we make sure that we are very very diligent and thorough about you know what um, what changes we're making and how much time we have to make sure that our changes aren't impacting placement of other things. Um, I think there was some discussion when I did the preview for King's Gondor last month about whether or not we would be able to um, backport the work that we're doing in those spaces to original Gondor, and that's very tricky because of the fact that there's a lot of physical change that is happening between those two regions, and because of that physical change, it's somewhat terrifying to think about just like doing a one-to-one swap, because we don't really necessarily know from the world design perspective, we don't necessarily know where everything is placed in the where every content designer has placed everything in the world. So we could inadvertently break quests, block quests, um, do things to content that already exists that would make that content not viable. It's not to say that we haven't made those accidents before, Dwayne, but um, they can happen, and we want to just make sure that we're careful when that happens. So doing things like bringing the King's Gondor changes into original Gondor is more than just a like push a button make it happen kind of thing, and it would require a considerable amount of specific focused work in order to make sure that we didn't break anything. And because of that, it makes it hard for us to really justify making those changes, at least as part of, update 36, for example. Uh, so we'll check out a couple more questions and then I'll continue on the run. So regarding some of the so the Druid's Fire had noted that you can get snow sort of in premium housing. I have seen some requests for a snowy themed premium housing, um, and certainly something that I'm not opposed to, and might be something that we could do like if we ever get around to doing something like Lossoth housing, for example, would be really interesting. or making a version of Winterhome that has a housing neighborhood associated with it, that sort of thing. Um, all right, so Aaron Bard says, "I heard you mention before how boundary tech has changed. I love the idea of smoothing hills and homesteads, but I would be against flattening the broader hills. The cliffs made them feel safe and cozy, very Hobbit." So I think the Hobbit neighborhood is probably pretty safe from that kind of treatment for the time being. When I did that with the Breland housing neighborhood, I did want, we have to maintain that kind of boundary, that border there, and the perimeter basically. So I tried to find ways to feel like the perimeter still exists without removing it completely, like without it just being a plain fence. So you've got the heavy bushes, along the boundary. You've got things like there are some portions of cliff here and there, but they're not everywhere. So I want to try to push that at some point too. Like we I have my test housing space, which in part is a test space to see like how how being in a housing neighborhood on instance zero on like normal landscape works. What kind of things like logging out, summoning people, like those sorts of things, what that can do. And if we're able to get a sense of that, then we can potentially do things like look at the Kingstead homesteads and see what we can do about bringing down those walls and making them more open and traversable. Um, so housing is a long game. Housing is something that I think there are a couple of us on the team, myself and Orion, um, who have a deep appreciation for it and see a lot of potential in the system beyond what it is currently. And it's just we're slowly building towards these sorts of things. We're slowly making our way through the features and ideas that we want to have implemented to really make housing something that um, can be a really strong and meaningful game system beyond just the kind of like decoration gameplay. Aaron Bard says, "What was the thoughts behind the change of the waterfall in the Bree homestead?" So some of that goes back to the kind of ecology um, discussion. Making things make sense. And the waterfall at the time we built it made sense, but trying to incorporate um, the Cardillon landscape into that and where water was flowing, it just never made sense to me that we'd have this, valley, basically this box canyon with water constantly flowing into it that would not just flood. So the change there was made just to make water make sense and make the landscape feel like a natural living space. And I know some people are disappointed because they intentionally bought the houses that were near there because of the waterfall, and I apologize for that dismay, um, but I hope that the view that they received from um, sticking it out, basically the view of the valleys south into Cardillon, um, makes up for some of that. All right, so we're coming up on flooded Isengard. So this is just kind of a brief run through here. One of the things I think I'll do is once we take a look at Isengard, I'll bop back to Entwade, and then continue kind of our progression from there up into Helm's Deep and whatnot. Um, so was Bree Homestead trying for an old growth forest feel? So the whole area is kind of an extension of the Chetwood, um, and it itself is an extension of things like Fangorn Forest. Ultimately, like every forest, west of the Misty Mountains was at one point a part of Fangorn Forest, and has since um, through deforestation from various cultures that have called those areas home, most notably the Numenorians. Um, Fangorn Forest is very much a shade of what it used to be, and with the old forest in particular kind of being that last remnant of what Fangorn used to be. Um, and I think with forests like that, there's a lot of like magic and power kind of prescribed to them, through the lore and what the meaning of the forest the meaning those forests have to the magic of the world. So, talking about alternate versions of things. So here we are in flooded Isengard, the flooded version of um, original Isengard, which players came here as part of the Dunland Dunland content experience. Um, so it's always interesting to see the takes that we have on versions of areas as the story requires it. But with that, I think it's time to bop back to where we were. Druid's Fire says, "Old growth forests are really my favorite, thanks to a sad and lonely, thanks to the sadly gone game landmark." Aaron Bard asks, "How has the tech around water changed?" I don't know that it's necessarily really changed all that much. When we built the game originally, our water volumes were very static materials, so we could make water flow, but we could only make it flow in one direction, which made for some weird water stuff happening. We did have a engineer who graced us with the ability to do things like water flow and to do detail layers on top of water. So, for example, you can if you go to the ocean, you can see there's kind of this foam layer that we can paint around on the ocean. In Swanfleet and Cardelon, there's this kind of like marshy, weedy layer that we can paint on there. So those are really the big changes that happen to water. We are talking about how we want to treat things like the oceans and the coastlines of Umbar now, and trying to figure out what that means and whether that approach is going to be the new water tech, whether that's going to be more robust particle effect systems that we can hand place. So that's still very much kind of an open question for us on how we're going to approach and leverage those effects in those spaces. Druid's Fire says, "Seeing them in Lotro, meaning the old growth forests, and getting to wander through them is nice, especially since I can't cut the trees down." I will admit there is a part of me that kind of wants to experiment a little bit with a kind of more air quotes realistic harvesting system for things like lumber and whatnot. I think we have a very simplistic method for gathering those resources where they're effectively just containers with a specific usage restriction on them, and that does the job for what we need it to do. But if we were to ever kind of like sit back and dedicate like considerable time, effort, and thought into like how can we build a more interactive and immersive world, I do think things like crafting resources on landscape are a candidate for some introspection and for to kind of look at them and go, okay, what ways can we make this a little bit more interesting, a little bit more engaging for the players, other than just here's a container that looks like a pile of wood. Dasmardo says, "Seeing flooded Isengard makes me feel like I'm missing out on cool areas." So the nice thing about Lord of the Rings is if you have not gotten to these areas yet, all you have to do is keep playing and you will eventually get to them. I think with rare exception, the epic storylines, whether that's the epic books or the Black Book of Mordor or what we're introducing as part of Update 36, like those main storyline quests take you through everywhere in the world, so you get an opportunity to see kind of see everything. which I think is one of the strengths of the main storyline. Is like, even if you're not feeling like you really want to play through all of the quests in the area, if you hew to the epic storyline, that will take you through remarkable areas, and it'll take you through everywhere. I, Aaron Bard says, "Who did the willows, and what kind of complications are there involved in creating a picnic blanket you could set down on landscape areas?" So willows, our art team does all of this work for us. I don't recall specifically who made the willows in the past because there have been numerous artists who have worked on the project, some who are here still, some who aren't. So I could not say specifically who made them. As far as complications involved with the picnic blanket you could put on the ground, honestly, the biggest complication is these frills. They are fairly dynamic in how we place them, but once they're kind of baked into game data, it's really hard to make them go away. So for a picnic blanket, for example, if you wanted it to actually like feel right, when you placed it down, you would need the area where the frills were, you would need those frills to go away. And there isn't really a good way to do that dynamically throughout the world, at least not in so far as our tools currently have available. I don't think I've ever been here before. Those good old Angmar assets getting some use. Nice to see. I think I'd remember coming down from here, though. So I don't think I'm going to head too much further west at this point, because I know we are starting to get into Beacon Hills and Farinorian soon, even though we're still in the Eastfold. But yeah, I think one of the things, like I mentioned back at the beginning of the stream, that was a bit of a challenge for us was figuring out how to, make the plains of Rohan feel distinct and interesting and different as you were, going through them all. And as we're running through here, like, I think, particularly in the later areas of Western Rohan, I think we do a good job. And I think some of it, too, is just, like, when you enter into building Rohan, the thought in your head is, oh, I have to build these massive, open, expansive plains, and that's not really doing justice to the actuality of what is in all of these spaces, in all of these regions. So yeah, so we'll keep on running this way. So we'll head back, see if we can get ourselves to Edoras and look around there for a little bit, and then head to Helm's Deep in the Glittering Caves. I know there are some Easter eggs here in Eastfold. There's a couple of like little. I think there's at least one Easter egg and one like just kind of like fun little space, but I do not know exactly where they are, so I'm not going to drive myself crazy and waste everyone's time trying to find them. So yeah, so while I'm running, we'll look at the chat a little bit more, see what's going on. So Schmooze says, I've noticed recently that some textures for stones or trees load in low resolution while other parts load in high resolution. You have reports on that. I am not certain exactly what you're talking about, but if there are examples for that or any bug that you have, please feel free to submit a bug for it. I know there have been some threads on the message boards that have been helpful, but by and large, put in a bug. If something feels like a bug, put in a bug. File it through the system. That way we're sure to get it on our plates. Because, whether it's me doing the fixing or if it's a bug for some other department, there's no guarantee that everyone is on the message boards at all times paying attention to everything. So the most surefire way to make sure that a bug lands on one of our plates is to file it through the system that you can find on the forums. I know it's a little bit of a bear to work with sometimes, but that really is the best way to go about it. Can you talk about, in brief, the process of going from blank screen to full quest ready for an area, please? Sadly, that is not something that I can really speak to. I've built some quests and deeds in the past, but really that's a question that you'll want one of our quest designers to better speak to. I think, like with everything, it starts with an idea, but as far as the kind of broad strokes, thought process, and implementation process for those things, you're best off asking one of our quest designers, one of our content designers, because they'll have a much better and much more robust answer than I can give. Let's see. So Primix331 asks, do you think in the future AI might help devs update and create more content for LOTRO? I will say that AI has not been something that has been a part of any of our conversations of late, outside of concerns regarding some of the ethics and how AI tools have been scraping and gathering data and whatnot, as well as kind of the pros and cons of what certain AI models can offer. But in general, we're not looking at any of those sorts of things to help our production pipeline. We're not opposed to leveraging new tools to help us. I think Swanfleet and Cardalon were kind of our first big step in really using a third-party tool called World Machine to help us build out our landscape and build it out in a bit more realistic detail. But in general, personally, I'm somewhat uncomfortable regarding AI design tools and AI art tools, in part because I don't feel like there's legislation and a community of ethics and standards quite yet established to kind of oversee how those tools are used. But everyone has different opinions on those things. Okendor asks, are you considering support for DLSS or FSR? I can't speak to anything about that at the moment. I'm not sure what exactly our plans are for the future of the engine currently, in large part because we are just so focused on what we're building this year, what we're building for the remaining updates of the year, that those sorts of things are not something that we have the time or the person power to really dig deep and implement on, even if we were to consider it. So here we are in Edoras. I always find whenever I first... So this is something that threw me off a lot when I first played through this as a player, because I was not a part of the construction, so I was not deeply familiar with with the region and whatnot. But it always threw me off, these big sprawly places. I always tend to get lost in them, at least initially, until I figure out the roads and kind of have that mental map of everything. I think once you've established, using that has no effect. I guess I got to teleport into there. Once you have the mental map of a space, then it gets a lot easier to figure out your way around. But until then, I remember the first couple of hours I was playing content in Edoras and being just not sure where I needed to go and whatnot. So we'll run down this way, and pardon me while I rocket jump over this wall. So we'll head down here real quick and then head over to Helm's Deep. We're running close on the end of time here, so I don't know that I'll get to any of the interiors actually for this. You know, I guess one of the benefits and detriments of having a game that's this big is there's so much to see, and even casually strolling as I am through this at 2.0 speed is still not enough time to get through what we've built in an hour. I think when we get to Helm's Deep, that'll be kind of an interesting conversation too. Largely because like Helm's Deep is one of those areas where we have like so many different versions of it. And it's almost kind of painful. Like it's one of those like, oh, someone found a stuck spot. Got to fix that stuck spot in like 7 different places now. Woohoo! Good old Underharrow. Alright. I'm gonna turn around and head back and get us to Helm's Deep and get us into the Glittering Caves. And Glittering Caves will be a good spot for us to wrap up for the night. Lost Shire Hobbit says, first time I got to Helm's Deep, I had to stop because it was like, wow, I made it. And I don't think this is the way that you were intending it to come across, but like in my head, reading that, I was just like, I made it. I'm finally the hero. And then like, then you make it to Minas Tirith, and that's another big, another big like, wow, I made it moment. And then you get to Minas Morgul, and that's another huge like, in Barad-dûr, like, wow, I made it. Like, I think it's kind of the Dragon Ball, power level 1-up every time. It's like, how do we give you that moment with every kind of like new region that we add? How do we make you feel like, you're entering into this new awe-inspiring place that really makes you feel like, like this is the pinnacle of my character, and then like taking you to that one next step in your imagination with the next thing that you go to. It's one of our challenges, and hopefully we manage to hit those moments of delighted discovery with every area that we build in some way. Hopefully we're able to hit that in some way. Maybe not for everyone, but for, one person who's like fantasized about being in that spot. Let's see. Druid's Fire says, someone sent SSG a real-life woven tapestry of Aldor the Old. That's true. We had that hanging up proudly on our walls at the office. I'm not sure where it's at now, just because of the changes that came about because of the pandemic. But it's certainly something that that we love and cherish, and is a part of the kind of like SSG culture. If that makes sense. All right, time to rocket jump over. Don't mind me as I traipse about in inaccessible landscapes. Not even sure I'll be able to get to Helm's Deep in time. I might have to go over by a couple of minutes. You guys okay if I go over by a couple of minutes? let's see. Ponton Finberry says, the last time I was amazed entering an area was seeing the Glooming Tarn in Gundabad. It was nicely spaced. It was a really nice space created underground. I think the assets that we got for Glooming Tarn, those basalt rocks, those are something that like I am chomping at the bit to find an opportunity to use something like that again, because they're distinct and impactful. Like they're really like strong and interesting assets, and I love them. Yeah. So Druid's Fire is joking, but I think part of the why I have kind of picked this time slot is because I don't think we have anyone who immediately follows up this time slot. So I think it's kind of safe for me to ramble a little bit extra if I have to. Um, but you all let me know if you want me to stop rambling. I'm happy to listen. All right, we're getting there. We're getting there. You know, I think it is hard to. I think it's very easy to underestimate how big a space like Rohan is. Um, even going at greater than Mount Speed, it is difficult to really understand just how big of a region we actually made here. And I think it's something that like when we were building Cardaswan, we were kind of looking at it like, is this bigger than Rohan? Is it bigger than both Rohans? Like, because I feel like Rohan really is kind of our benchmark for scale when it comes to things that we've built before. All right, we finally made it to Helm's Deep. At least one version of it. I'm not gonna take us through all the different versions, but Twin Bren says, I love Lotro so much. I'm so thankful in my old age to have this beautiful place. And we're happy to build it. Like, I think this is something that, any nerd of this, any geek and appreciator of the source material, like, this is just a glorious opportunity that not many people get to work on. All right, so we're winding down this stream. If you have any remaining questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat so that I can, rapid fire answer them before it's time to wrap up the stream. This was I think this was another, talking about Helm's Deep, the Hornburg. This is another kind of very much a precursor space. This is the artists who were building it really needed to figure out how to build something with this kind of complexity, because we hadn't done too much of this before. And it didn't help that Helm's Deep itself is so iconic to the story. But there's a lot of stuff that through building this we were able to learn to inform us in building things like Minas Tirith, Minas Morgul, building the various structures that we've built since, and honestly, like, informing some of what we're going to be building as part of Umbar. Alright, let's see if there are any other questions while I get us into the Glittering Caves. So we're going to go into a version of the Glittering Caves. I'm not sure which version we're going into, but it's by and large the same throughout. I think this is the Big Battles version, so there's probably not going to be much for NPCs and whatnot in here. But this was a really interesting space. One of the things that, as I've like gone through it, I've always kind of just wished that there was a little bit more that could be done in here. More to do as a player, more to explore and see. But that is not a problem that I'm going to find time for myself to resolve anytime soon, I think. So Fusel Heine asks, when you populate the world with animals and critters, do you place them manually or is it done automatically? Do they have a certain range across which they roam? Also, when you kill a wolf, will it always be replaced by a wolf? Or can it also be a friendly animal like a deer or a rabbit? So we have a couple of different. Layers to how our landscape mixed spawns work. We have normal mixed creature spawns, which are things like your wolves, your bears, the stuff that you can fight that will grant you loot and XP. And then we have the critter spawns, which are things like rabbits, deer. Occasionally we'll put some crafting items into there, like the vegetables and whatnot. And those are two separate layers. So, killing an enemy wolf will not mean that a deer spawns in, because they're separate. We don't want you to be in a situation where someone's going through and just like maybe they're deeding or something and they're just like cherry picking all the things they need for their deeds and then having everything respawn as a deer. We don't want that. When it comes to placement, we hand place what we call markers. And that defines the origin point of where a creature can spawn, whether that, or anything on the landscape can spawn, whether that is a thing like a wolf, something like a wolf that you can kill, or a critter, or a resource node. Like, all of them are based off of a marker. And then the generators that spawn them kind of tell the marker, this is the set of things that can spawn off of this. When that is spawned, then it the thing that spawns, if it is an AI, if it is a creature of some sort, will kind of wait for a little bit and then go, okay, time for me to wander. And there's a range that we define on all the markers about how far that they can wander. So that's kind of how you get a wander radius of things. Spoosh. Let's see if I can go places where I'm not supposed to go. So Aaron Bard asks, is it possible to go to an area like Bree and add a new room behind an old door, or is the asset fixed? No, we can certainly do that if there's a need for us to go do that. I think the most recent addition I made to Bree was the broker's office, where all of our various housing brokers are, and that was just I found a building that didn't have an entrance to it, an actual usable entrance, and was just like, okay, this is where I'm gonna put this. So let me rocket jump up and rocket jump up. And rocket jump down. So yeah, it's very possible. Do you have a favorite limited access area, some location that is only used for a single quest? I don't know that I have a specific favorite one, and I'll be honest, like, nothing. I don't have one that really jumps to the front of my mind when thinking about that question. I think I'm certainly happy with some of the spaces I've built, and often those are either instance spaces or little one-off interiors. But I don't know that I would necessarily call any of think about them in terms of like which one's my favorite. Xfella says, boats, please. Personal boats, canoes, John boats, dinghies, please. It's something that we've talked about, especially ever since I added in the boat travel along the Brandywine. Um, I can't speak to when that would happen because there's a lot of animation and game system support that would need to happen to make boat pants happen. But yeah. Anyways, I think at this point we're gonna wrap up the stream. So thank you everyone for attending and asking your questions and for joining me on this tour of Western Rohan. I don't recall off the top of my head what the next region in Rovanian is going to be that we'll be touring through. But that will happen within the next month or so, assuming I don't have any other previews of things that I want to show off to you. So, anyways, thank you everyone for being here. For those of you that haven't done so yet, the patch is live and anniversary stuff should be going on soon. I think it starts tomorrow. So get yourself patched up and enjoy the 16th anniversary of LOTRO. We've got the Court of the Ring happening later this week on Friday, so feel free to jump that in and ask any questions there that I wasn't able to answer for you. And yeah, I hope everyone is enjoying, continues to enjoy LOTRO, is enjoying Update 35, and is looking forward to jumping into the raid when that opens up soon too. Anyways, have a great day, everyone. Thank you for being here, and we'll see you all next stream.